Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Legacies. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, there's a whole conversation of where are these monsters coming from. There must be a portal of Malivore. So what we're going to try and do is, because Cleo was able to summon a monster last time, the ferryman, that means that we can, potentially get Cleo to summon another one, but maybe one that's smaller, more controllable, and get it to talk so we can find out what's going on. But, Laura's got other stuff to deal with, and he's like, so while I'm dealing with that, you guys don't do anything, just work harmoniously. I also love Landon being like, man, all these other monsters, man, I missed out on like all this other stuff that happened while I was gone. But obviously a big part of this episode, and I think it's a really interesting element, is the Lizzie and Hope thing, that the bad blood between them. And I'd actually made this comparison before, is actually like their relationship went backwards, because this is kind of very reminiscent of how they were in season 1. Like Lizzie kind of resented like Hope a lot. Hope wasn't as, I feel like Hope's a little resentful towards Lizzie now. Mainly it's because it's like she's resentful at Lizzie because Lizzie's resentful at her, but there's also other underlying issues. So it's a little more both, it kind of goes both ways a little bit this time, whereas last time it was a little bit more one-way street, more so alone like Lizzie's part. But now I feel like they kind of divvy up the kind of bad blood that they have. But, because that's the thing for Hope, she can't see that, like, how she handled things was kind of wrong. It's like, I do want to apologize for the fact is that, what happened to Josie. I am sorry for that, but it's also like, even because Landon was trying to get across the point, like, you might want to poke at this and that about Lizzie, but if you actually two started talking, you realize that you two are very similar personality-wise. Well, not personality-wise, but just who you are. Like, you actually have a lot in common, and it's like, take that back, So while, Landon's kind of handling things on the Hope front, there's the Caleb and Lizzie situation, which both of them are feeling, they're both reeling from the fact is that, like, right, MG enrolled at Mystic Falls, and Caleb didn't know that. He's like, MG's a little pissed, like, or at least a little sour right now, but eventually he'll come back and he's like, oh, he enrolled at Mystic Falls with Lizzie. Oh, because Caleb didn't know that. And for both of them, they're hit by that because for Lizzie, both people that she care about deeply are gone. People, both who are kind of her foundation. She doesn't have Josie to lean on. She doesn't have an MG to lean on. Like, normally under these circumstances, she'd have one of them to be there, but neither one is there. And obviously for Caleb, it's like MG is his family, So both of them are missing a family member. In her case, Lizzie. His case, MG. But obviously MG kind of, is very important to Lizzie as well. So it's just like they're both kind of reeling and feeling that. But it's almost like, don't worry, the only friend he's got is Josie. Eventually he'll come back because obviously he's going to be kind of a little bit alone, is kind of how Caleb was kind of looking at it. Which obviously there's a whole thing of like, MG, pretending to fit in and everything. And it's like, I even loved Josie mentioning how it's funny that, there's all these different cliques at high school, but it's even more divided than their school, the Salvatore school, which is literally divided into factions. This is kind of even more divided, amongst the clique and stuff like that. It's like, here's the cheerleaders and the football players, but over here, like the comic book nerds and geeks, like that's probably more your speed. But for him, he wants to say, like, kind of reinvent himself. He hears the one particular cheerleader is like, oh, she's kind of into me and stuff like that. It's like, no, Josie's like, no vampire stuff, because the fact of the matter is, she's like, my dad's just going to pop out of nowhere and kind of, it's like, oh, you're being paranoid, which he later on shows up. I love that whole thing of like, hey, I need you to look into this. I was like, oh, sure, no problem, Rick. So you're just going to stay here? He's like, no, why would I stay here? He's like, right, because your kid goes to this school, so you're checking on you. And he's like, I'm doing a little spying. It's like, all right, fine. I'll give you a substitute job. And he's like, oh, cool. My human history's a little rusty. It's like, who said it was going to be human history? Which, let's not forget, if you've forgotten, Alaric was a teacher at one point in time for Mystic Falls, so it is interesting. Well, to be fair, he was literally the principal last season, so it's not that crazy. It's actually not even his first time back. First time back mainly as a teacher, so... Was he a permanent teacher, or was he just a substitute teacher? I think he started as a substitute teacher, but became a permanent teacher later parts of the Vampire Diaries, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a long time since I've seen early Vampire Diaries. To anyone that's curious, I always talk about this. Like, I've only seen every season of the Vampire Diaries once, and a lot of it blurs together, and I'm sure there's a lot I've actually forgotten just because it's been so damn long. Because I saw every season when it initially came out, I believe, roughly speaking. I think season 1's the one I ended up missing the most of. I know some of it, but I think season 2 on is where I'm a little bit more familiar. But once again, like I said, a lot of that stuff blurs together. But I love him being the gym coach and everything. And, like, Josie being so embarrassed. She's like, yeah, me being paranoid, right? And it's just being so embarrassed by it. And just, like, she's telling MG, to stop looking. He's like, I can't help it. You know, it's just like, it's like his terrible fashion taste and stuff like that. But regardless, obviously, you know, Ethan's going through some stuff right now because he got cut from the football team. And because of that, he's got a little bit of animosity towards other people in the team who are kind of giving him shit. And so, obviously, MG ended up saving him from getting hit by a bus, but it's like, whoa, you saved me. But then in Ethan's mind, it's like, oh, you got superpowers. And immediately when he started dropping like stuff like, oh my God, is Vervain your kryptonite? You're like, he's a nerd. It's like, holy crap, you're the popular kid that's that athletic popular kid who's also a nerd. He's super into comic books and stuff like that. I even love that thing of like, Lizzie was making some wisecrack about John Constantine, and Kayla was like, first and foremost, it's John Constantine, and you damn well know it. So it's like, stop fronting. You know who this is just because, you know, you spend enough time around MG to know. Like, that nerdy stuff rubs off. There's no escaping that when you spend enough time with MG. But I thought that was kind of an interesting element to this episode, kind of circling back really quickly, is to the MG and Ethan thing, them becoming buds like that, them kind of hitting it off. Initially, it's like, oh, I gotta wipe your memories. But then, like, the moment he was talking, he's like, yes, I don't remember anything. And then it was like, because even Josie immediately caught up on, like, that's a little weird, because I was like, yeah, it seemed like he was faking it. Turns out he was. He's got Vervain in his system. It's like, did you tell Mac about Vervain? Turns out she put it in his pills without telling him about the supernatural. She prepared him for the supernatural. So it's like, oh, we're just going to have to wait for that to get out of your system and stuff like that. But then MG kind of opened up to him, you know, and explained his backstory. And he's like, oh, you're a vampire. And he's like, yeah, I mean, the biting, drinking blood bit kind of sucks. Also, like the fact that your parents didn't accept you, you know. But actually that kind of led to some, like bromancing, like, bonding of friends, bro moments, I guess is what I'm meant to just straight up say. But it's like, because for Mac, Mac was willing to leave out Mystic Falls, but give Ethan a shot to stay behind and play football because this is very important to him. But for him, it's like, now that I've gotten cut, I don't know how to tell him, because my mom was believing in me, like, was willing to kind of, you know, make the sacrifice of leaving me here for that, and for me to get cut. It's like, I don't know how to tell her. Also, because it's like, I don't know who I am without football, but it's also about trying to find that out, you know? Because initially, that's what MG was trying to compel him to do. It's like, oh, try and find that thing that you're really good in, that you're passionate about, that isn't football. But for him, it's like, when you do take away everything, now that the Vervain's out of my system, you can just leave. The fact is, we met today. And he's like, why? It's like, because we're friends now, right? And I don't want to forget that. And I kind of need a friend right now. So we find out later on that MG didn't wipe his memories. He let him keep everything, even though Lark's not going to be too keen on that. But obviously that comes with its benefits and its downsides. But I think it's also like, it's not just Ethan that needed a friend right now. It's just considering MG feels like the way everyone at Salvatore Tool had kind of turned their back on him and kind of used him, like, he feels like he doesn't have anyone in his corner, in his side. So just as much as Ethan needs a friend right now, he needs a friend right now. Kind of someone outside of the Josie thing too, I think. Because also it probably feels nice to kind of just be appreciated and just someone to be like, yo, dap you up as your friend, but also know everything there is. There's no secrets. Everyone's out in the open, and it's just kind of clear cut, like, oh, we're friends and we know what's what, you know? But I kind of went on a huge tangent on that side of things. But let's circle back over to the monster side of things, because the main monster this episode being a gremlin. I love that thing shows up and it's like, oh my God, look at this thing. It's so cute. Oh, that's so awesome. Because initially what started all this was like, Lizzie was going to try and get Cleo to summon, what was it? There was something specific. Oh, it was something... What was it? It's something that's similar to a genie. Was it a pixie? Was that what she was planning on summoning? I think it might have been. Because she made a reference to like, oh, John Constantine being in a long coat, and then like a Tinkerbell. So it was like, yeah, it was like a pixie or something of that nature. But trying to get Cleo, it's like, hey, you're part of the Super Squad, but you're kind of like a select member selected kind of situation of like, because I'm like your mentor in this situation, all you got to do is like one superheroic thing. So she was trying to, you know, summon a monster behind Hope's back, and obviously they're back and forth, just being a whole thing throughout the episode of like calling each other out for like the stuff they've done. And so I even love that at one point in time they do it in front of an entire audience, and the other students are like, oh, kind of like one of those moments of kind of them like snapping back and forth. It's like, it's one of those moments you're like, snap! Oh, she said what? Snap! It's one of those moments. Obviously, you have Landon trying to be the mediator in many different regards, because he sees like the good and bad on both sides. Like he sees like neither one of it's not. I mean, even then, it's not really a good and bad. It's just like both of you are right, and you're just kind of both a little too stubborn to realize once again how similar you guys are. But it turns out this gremlin, as they find out it is a gremlin, and he got super excited. He's like, it's a gremlin, but no one else got as excited because he's like, wait, what? It's like, wait, you guys don't know? You've all never seen the movie. Because obviously Hope slowly but surely winding into, you know, his nerd realm of like picking up his nerd references, having watched the movies. It's like, oh my god, you watched that movie. Okay. You know, so it's that, but it's still like a lot to catch up on. But he was excited about it being a gremlin, but instead of feeding off, don't feed it after midnight, this particular one feeds off of distrust, no disrespect. And obviously there's a lot going on between Lizzie and Hope. Obviously, Lizzie thinking Hope pushed her into a pool, and her calling Hope out by being like, yeah, you're the one that's kind of, everyone's lives are threatened when you're around, because obviously it's just kind of like everyone gets swept up in Hurricane Hope to a certain extent. But then like Hope thinks that was Lizzie's voice saying all that, bad-mouthing her and stuff like that. But the thing gets stronger and stronger, and but it turns out it's not after Landon, which is kind of a first, because typically they're all. But now I think in retrospect, now with the ending, which we saw that creature from that came out of Malivore, it seems like, I guess he's the one summoning him, because I guess that's why it's not coming after, because despite him not being a phoenix anymore, he's still the perfect host for Malivore. So I guess it's a situation of, regardless of all of that, I guess whatever this thing is, it has plans of its own, and it's not trying to, because we never found out like why it took Cleo. I guess it's like Cleo would just be what was necessary to kind of rock the boat on their disrespect, so it just worked out that it's like, oh, it ended up making itself stronger in that regard. Maybe that's why they never really went into why it chose Cleo. Maybe there's something about Cleo that obviously there's still bits about her past we don't know. We've got some stuff here and there, but maybe there's other reasons why the gremlin was, took Cleo, because maybe it's not of its own volition. Obviously, maybe someone else. So which is kind of interesting to think of, that maybe someone else is filling that role, the role of the necromancer who was kind of controlling the monsters last season, like, or at least summoning them. Like, no, not even last season. Well, this season / last season, but maybe this new creature is kind of filling that role, or maybe it's a completely separate situation. It's kind of watching from, a certain view of what's going on. Once again, I'm still curious whether or not they're going to answer anything with this, because let's not forget, she's somewhere in there. She's not a monster, she's a regular human, so that's why Malivore's not popping her out. But once again, Landon's mom, we still haven't, I don't know if they ever plan on circling back, or is that just going to be a storyline they leave hanging? Is it something they're going to come back to much, much later? Or like, what on that? Like, the last time we saw his mom was when she sacrificed herself in season 1. That's about it. I think that's the last time they really talked about her. I don't think they talked about her maybe at all. She might have been referenced a couple times in season 2, but never not to big extents, So I'm curious if, maybe that has something to do with this. I don't think it does, but you never know. Which, go on the rescue mission to save Cleo. Obviously, Hope and Lizzie have to start respecting each other and has to be genuine so that the monster gets weaker. At first, it's kind of like they say stuff like, "Oh, I like your hair. Oh, I like your hair too. I like the cut." Well, the other one did a better job of shaping your face or something like that. But eventually, it got, the moment Hope was like, "Actually, I am sorry about the whole Josie thing," which, it's like, well, I can get it. You're like, how you would do anything, will go above and beyond 24/7 for Landon. It's the same way I am. The fact is, I'd go that far for myself. I'm that obsessed with myself as well as Josie, so I can understand. And them complimenting each other by being like, bringing up, attention to each other's good qualities back and forth. They're able to save Cleo. Which I also love that she was like, yeah, the monster got stronger because I was bad-mouthing it the entire way it was dragging me here. But luckily, they're like, well, we can't take the chance this thing might get free and get more powered up from disrespect. So rather than keeping it, they end up squishing it. So it starts off so cute, and then in its weakest form, it looks so obviously, it looks very when it's fully powered up and stuff, when it's big and scary and everything. But ultimately, everything got resolved in that front. What I thought was kind of a neat scene between Landon and Hope is kind of where I figured things would... It could be a potential of where things could have gone. And because obviously, once again, someone was concerned. They were like, oh, I don't want this entire season to be about just like saving Landon. I figured it wouldn't be. Like, obviously, and I talked about this last episode, I believe, was the whole thing of she can be very obsessive. She can get like very like tunnel vision about stuff, much like not even just her dad, like a lot of people in her family, even her mom could get like tunnel vision sometimes. But I guess like there ain't no tunnel vision like Klaus tunnel vision, because when he's like obsessive and hyper focused on certain particular things, like a lot of other stuff goes to the wayside. Like when it's kind of what he wants, that becomes his focus and his everything. He would do and kill anyone to get what he wants, type of thing. And I hope it's not to that extent, but it's like her obsession over Landon and him trying to fix that by being like, don't. And I resonate with that scene a lot. I think I've brought this up in reviews before. I've made a video about it years ago, talking about the fact is I was, especially as a teenager, I was literally in that situation where I made a girlfriend my everything. I think I have talked about this in reviews. So that's when characters are in that situation. I'm like, dude, I resonate with that. That was me 10 to 12 years ago, like for me being like 16 to 18, the relationship I was in at that time, and obviously it still kind of stemmed after that to like into my early 20s, was that aspect of, like making someone your everything, like you kind of let everything else go to the wayside. It's like, I will always be with you, but don't, there's enough of you to go around. Hope Michelson to share with other people because, that's what created the circumstance in the first place. Like he had brought it up earlier. It's like, if you guys had come together, maybe you could have found another way. You didn't have to go down the Josie route. Like maybe, Lizzie would have helped. But you kind of forced her to end up doing something, by turning on MG just to protect her sister. So, but it's a situation of, you've got to take more consideration because your obsession with me leads to resentment because you're willing to stab and screw over everyone else just for me. It's like, and like I said, I thought that was like an impactful thing because I think that is something that Hope has got to break because Landon has become her everything. He's her entire happiness and kind of willing to throw away all the bonds she has with every other character for that sake. So it's like, let's not do that. Like, let's, spread the wealth around, spread that love around. Don't let me just become your everything because no one should be your everything. Yes, someone can mean a lot to you, but you got to spread your heart out. You can't just put your heart all in one person. You got to spread it out, because because that obsession can be a very negative factor. And we've seen that time and time again with how obsessed Hope is about Landon, how far and beyond she's willing to go for him. So it's like, at least this way, I think Landon is hoping that when it's all said and done, this will kind of rein her back in from like doing anything too crazy like this in the future. She did bring up something that's like, oh, when did you get so perfect? Which I'm like, there is something off about Landon, like the way he's acting. like he hasn't been right since Malivore possessed his body. Like that's why I talked about it like after like he died, but he popped back up because they were in the prison dimension. I'm like, dude, in his interactions with the necromancer and Hope in that particular scene, I'm like, after he came back after being burned by the dragon, I was like, he seemed off. That's why the entire time I was like, oh, Malivore must be possessing him. It didn't seem right. But now, I don't know. We don't know everything that he went through while he was in that prison world. Time works differently, so there's no telling what's what. Like, it feels like something's off with him. Once again, I've been in my tinfoil hat mood in many of these reviews lately, so that's why I'm like, I don't know whether it's just I'm reading into stuff way, way too much, or maybe there is, once where there is smoke, there's fire. So maybe there's some, I don't know. It's just an interesting development on the front. Another element I thought was interesting is like the Cleo and Caleb situation of obviously him trying to like, oh, let's kind of make there be something between us, but it's like, oh, she's kind of hesitant because it's also like the school isn't what she thought it was. She thought like, oh, this would be a peaceful, creative place, but it's like, oh no, things aren't that dangerous. Yet you guys talk about Malivore being as dangerous as he is. Is he not dangerous? It's like, I kind of can't deny how dangerous this thing is. But it also makes her question like not only the school, but also being a part of the super squad. And it's like, let's figure out our situation after we're not, we don't want to create a dynamic where it's like, oh yes, us being in a very life and death situation is where things spark. Let's kind of see where things are after, when we're not in a life and death situation. So, but obviously we see them kind of strolling later on, and I thought it was neat. He was like, I'm going to check on my buddy MG. He's probably all alone, but then like Caleb sees him with Ethan, and you can tell it kind of breaks his heart a little bit because it's like, yeah, he's glad to see MG with friends, but it also means like, oh, like MG's okay. Like there's on some level kind of very much like Josie. It's like, oh, like Josie and Lizzie in the sense that like Lizzie seeing Josie happy, like, yeah, you want her happy, but it also breaks your heart a little bit because it's like, right, I can't do that for you, but also that means you're moving on and you don't need me as much. And so for Caleb, it's like, oh, MG's good. Like he's not as, like I was so assuming that he was going to be alone, but now it's like, oh, the fact is he's got a friend, and that means it's going to get to the point that he might decide to stay here because things might be better for him here, especially because he was like, yeah, MG pissed me off, but we're family and yada yada. And it's like, it's like, oh, we're going to be good again. But now it's like, oh, regardless of how I feel about it, MG might already be moving on. So you can tell it hit Caleb in a certain way seeing that. Like he wasn't all happy. He was just kind of like, he was like a little, sad about the circumstances. So thought that was an interesting development on that front. But another interesting thing is the conversation between Alaric and Josie, where it's like he just wants to kind of, talk to her because she thought it was going to be a conversation about the dark magic and everything, which even he admits, like, yeah, he's worried, but he doesn't want their circumstances to be like Ethan and Mac. It's like Mac did all this stuff, as a parent, but obviously not telling Ethan what's what, the vervain and those pills and everything. So it's like, I don't want there to be any secrets between us. So like, if you ever feel the need to, you can talk to me, but I'm also going to give you the freedom because yes, you and your sister are the most important thing to me in the world, but I want to give you an opportunity to spread your wings, live your life, to grow, and I kind of owe you that freedom to kind of do that, And it's also like, obviously she kind of hints to like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a girl of that being Fitch, and it's like, oh, things are complicated. Yeah, but I also love the whole thing of like, also make sure you never take dating advice from anyone like Damon. Especially not Damon because they're out in front of Elena's place. It's like, oh, Aunt Elena and everything. I'm like, oh, we're not going to see him, of course, but it's still nice to be like, oh, stopping by their place for dinner and stuff like that. Because once again, that's the cool thing about it. I think I've referenced that too. It's like, yeah, because even during I think I might have talked about that during the musical episode. Like, obviously, like, Elena and Damon are alive in this continuity. Like, they reference Bonnie. She's popped up once, hasn't she? She might not even popped up once. I know Freya's popped up twice. Jeremy's popped up once. Matt was only in season 1. He might have been in like a few episodes of season 2. I don't remember. I want to say he might have been in a few episodes of season. Maybe not at all. I don't remember. But so a lot of those characters are alive in this continuity, so they'll be referenced, but you won't actually see them, which is actually kind of crazy to think about. It's not like Elena and Damon were dead. That they just think about like, all right, that I wonder did the news come back to them? Because you'd assume Josie probably talked about it. Oh yeah, like and Aunt Elena, like I played you in a I played you in a play. Oh right, and who was Damon? It's like, oh yeah, it was Caleb, him and Jed was kind of more okay with being Stefan, whereas everyone else kind of wanted to be you, which I'm sure Damon was going to be. I should have talked about it because Damon probably was like, "Oh, a whole bunch of people want to play me, huh? That's cool." But I love it all. It's just interesting stuff to think about. So. But at the end, once again, we do see like the continuation of Lizzie and Hope being in a better place. So it's like, oh, like, you know, like I said, their relationship kind of took a few steps back, but I think we're slowly seeing it kind of get back to where it was. And I think going forward, it'll be better and stronger than ever, you know, that those bonds will be reforged and, you know, in steel and be stronger than ever. So I also forgot to add in the fact is there is that stinger at the end of the episode where Alaric and Dorian with that whole device, that the thing that was meant to help get Landon back, that Alaric's kept on hand this entire time trying to figure it out because he's wondering whether or not this has anything with to do with the monsters popping up. Is it just coincidence or something to be concerned about? But then I'd actually completely forgot there was the opening bit. Wasn't that Clark in Belgium 1933? Wasn't one of those dudes Clark? I think it was, but I mean, you know, that could be me mistaking it. It looked like the actor who played Clark, but I mean, maybe that device in itself has something to do with. I don't know if they ever really went into the specific. I know they said like he took, you know, human DNA, and obviously he took Phoenix DNA to make Landon, but I don't know if whether he was just able to make that happen, or did he need like a special device, like said device, or what? We still don't know a lot on that front, so I'm wondering if this has any correlation to that. If that was Clark, I could be completely full of crap, but I could have sworn that was him. But also, we saw the dude at the beginning. I was like, is that Albert Einstein? Lo and behold, it turns out to be Albert Einstein. This thing has got a long history of being in a lot of different people's hands, because it's like, whoa, that's Albert Einstein. He had it. It's like, oh, so it can't be that bad. But then it turns out, oh, Rasputin had it. Oh, Napoleon had it, which is actually interesting for Napoleon to be referenced, because most recent reference of Napoleon in something was 30 coins, about how, like, oh yeah, the coins, Judas's 30 pieces of silver can, like, really, like, screw people over, to screw them up to be full-blown evil. That it's kind of the reason why they're evil, or kind of amplifies the darkness that's already there. Maybe this is kind of in a similar vein of like, oh, this thing was there and kind of during some very, like, terrible people in human history. So begs the question, like, does it fuel the fire that's in them, the darkness in them, or not? I mean, it makes you wonder. Maybe it has something to do with why Landon's back, and maybe Landon's putting on airs and pretending to be fine when in actuality maybe there's a little darkness that creeped in. Because we saw, like, when we saw Hope throw that device, that thing, into the water, it opened up and started glowing, so it seemed like it did respond to her wish on some level. But like I said, maybe they're trying to make that seem like Landon might be the next, like, much like how dark magic took control of Josie. Maybe there's kind of a similar vein of things kind of going on with Landon. Once again, we don't know what this is. We're just kind of it just shows that this thing has a connection to some bad people in history. So be interesting too, just because, like, with Legends of Tomorrow, bad people from history being, the Encores and everything. So it just kind of made me think of that really quickly. But like I said, a lot of interesting things to keep in mind. I'm really curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.